Look at this face. This was the facade of the Palazzo Braschi, the headquarters of the Italian Fascist Party in Rome. It was a billboard erected in support of Benito Mussolini ahead of Italy's last elections in 1934. But these elections were not normal. In fact, only fascists were allowed on the ballot. It was a sham. That's because Italy, at the time, was under fascist rule, and Mussolini was the dictator in charge. The design transformed the building into a kind of temple to obedience, a visual mantra repeating itself over and over. Yes, yes, yes. This facade is an example of fascism's curious relationship with aesthetics. In the 1930s, as Europe reeled from one world war and inched closer to another, fascist regimes weren't just building armies. They were building myths, carved into marble, projected onto cinema screens, and paraded through city streets. To fascist leaders, aesthetics weren't just important, they were everything. But why did they care so much about how things looked? Well, behind this attitude hid a dark and twisted genius. As you may know, videos like this are kind of risky on YouTube due to the likelihood of them being demonetized. However, Odoo, this video's sponsor, have been super chill. They've made an informative video like this possible. Odoo are an all-in-one management software that makes managing your business a lot easier. If you have one, you're probably aware of how much software you need just to set it up, let alone run your day-to-day business. You need a website builder, you need web hosting, you need an e-commerce platform, you need CRM, you need to manage your accounting, all on different softwares. It's all just a bit of a mess and annoying. Odoo simplifies this by creating one single, easy-to-manage ecosystem in which you can access all of the apps you need in one place. And what's better is that all of the apps communicate with each other to make it easier for you to track things. Odoo grows with you, so you can just start with one app and gradually add them as your business evolves. The best part is that you can actually get rid of all of the expensive subscriptions that you have for each individual service and replace it with just one at the fraction of the cost. Odoo saves you money and makes managing your business simpler and easier. Swap to Odoo today for just $19.90 a month and access the entire suite of applications. Click on my link in the description or pinned comment below to check it out. I really do think it's a bit of a no-brainer. But that's it. Let's get back to the video. Early in his political career, Mussolini declared that fascism was not just an ideology, it was a religion. Like any religion, it needed a visual language, and before long it had one. In the early 20th century, two artistic movements helped shape fascism's visual language: Romanticism and Futurism. At first glance, these seemed like strange bedfellows. The Romantic movement contained a longing for the past, an obsession with nature, and a focus on the sublime. Futurism, by contrast, called for the total annihilation of the past. It worshipped speed, machines, and violence. But together, these two influences gave fascism a peculiar ability to look both backward and forward, to summon the glory of past empires while promising a radical new future. Italian futurists like Filippo Tommaso Marinetti were some of the earliest supporters of Mussolini. They believed that Italy needed to shake off its sleepy traditions and embrace war and technology to bring about a new order. Their manifestos were full of aggressive language, and their art rejected softness and nuance in favour of bold lines, angular forms, and kinetic energy. Mussolini's face on the Palazzo Braschi embodies that aesthetic. The solid stone and harsh lines are unambiguous. Fascism's furrowed brows bury into you a deep, piercing gaze, and it says, "I am watching. Obey." For a time, futurism seemed like a promising accompaniment to fascism. It made sense to Mussolini that revolutionary art should support what he saw as a revolutionary movement. But there was one big problem. Futurism failed to support one of fascism's most fundamental aims. Fascist leaders didn't just want to look forward, they also wanted to look back, all the way to ancient times. In 1922, Mussolini declared that Rome is fascism's, quote, point of departure and reference. It is our symbol, or if you wish, our myth. We dream of a Roman Italy that is wise and strong, disciplined and imperial. German dictator Adolf Hitler echoed this sentiment, though some of his Nazi peers wanted to glorify the old Germanic tribes. Hitler idolized ancient Rome and Greece. Hitler's chief architect, Albert Speer, recorded him once saying, quote, "Why do we call the whole world's attention to the fact that we have no past? It's bad enough that Romans were erecting great buildings when our forefathers still lived in mud huts. All we prove by that is that we were still throwing stone hatchets and crouching around open fires when Greece and Rome had already reached the highest stage of culture." While Mussolini's reference to Rome was nationalistic, Hitler's was aspirational. But in both cases, it helped build a myth critical to fascist ideology, that the nation had fallen and required a rebirth. To this end, much of fascist architecture incorporated neoclassical styles. Both Hitler and Mussolini undertook huge architectural projects to bring the aesthetics of ancient Rome to their city streets. In Italy, Mussolini commissioned an enormous sports complex, which included the Stadio de Marmi, in English, the Stadium of Marble. As articulated by its chief designer, the project was meant to be, quote, a complex of severe monumentality that could be traced back to the greatest monuments of ancient Rome. Not only was the stadium huge, it was lined with 4-meter-high statues of nude athletes in classical poses. These figures encircled the entire stadium, forcing all who trained inside to come face to face with the racial and physical ideals lauded by fascist leaders. They placed particular emphasis on physical primacy because they wanted every citizen to be able to serve the state to the greatest of their abilities. If they were physically weak or, God forbid, impaired, then they were dead weight at best and liabilities at worst. Thus, these statues typified the strong, ab-chiseled masculine bodies that fascism idealized. Hundreds of miles away, similar forms flanked the new Reichschancellery in Berlin. Produced by Hitler's official state sculptor Arno Breker, the statues known as the Army and the Party observed all who graced the building. Like in Rome, these statues weren't just decoration. They were ideological tools, broadcasting a clear message about the kind of body and the kind of citizen fascism sought to produce. But when it came to world building, it wasn't enough to just have some statues here and there. Mussolini and Hitler wanted to fully revamp the way people moved through the world. In Germany, Hitler spent years drafting plans for Germania, a total redesign of Berlin meant to recall Imperial Rome. In Italy, Mussolini actually carried out the construction of the UER district. Among its many buildings inspired by Roman design was the Palazzo della Civiltà Italiana, also known as the Square Colosseum. The project merged modernist design with ancient influence, making tangible the tension between fascism's exaltation of the past and its idealization of a fresh future. Compared to the Colosseum of ancient Rome, the Square Colosseum is stark, geometric, and imposing. Everything is harsher, sharper, more intimidating. Ornament has been stripped away, replaced by blank marble and empty space. While the original Colosseum is horizontally dominant, the Square Colosseum towers above passers-by. Of course, Neoclassicism wasn't unique to fascist design. Lots of people and places have tried to harken back to ancient Rome, but the manner in which fascists imitated it seems to say a lot about what they were trying to be. Compare the US Capitol building to Hitler's proposed Volkshalle, the centerpiece of his redevelopment plans for Berlin. Both drew inspiration from Rome's Pantheon. Their architects reached for familiar Roman forms: columns, domes, arches. But despite using similar architectural vocabularies, they have completely different tones. In part, this is due to scale. Hitler had big ideas for Germania, literally. Every part of the new capital was meant to be big. The train station was to be the largest in the world, the cinema was designed to seat 6,000 people, and the Volkshalle Plaza was supposed to hold 1 million. And the Volkshalle itself? It was supposed to be the largest structure in the whole world. Only with its construction did Hitler believe that Nazi Germany would finally, quote, put Rome, its only competitor, in the shade. If one could stand under a structure like this, perhaps they would get a sense of the size, scale, and power that these leaders wanted to project. Not just as leaders of a nation, but as figures that hoped to transcend time. These buildings, like many in Nazi Germany and Mussolini's Italy, were designed to be lasting symbols. Hitler explicitly intended for the architecture of Germania to last 1,000 years. Because fascism wasn't just about the domination of the present. It was about creating a legacy, a grand historical narrative where the state never fails, even when the leaders themselves are long gone. On this front, Germania was an utter failure. Despite years of planning and building intricate models, little construction work ever got underway. All that survived World War II were some street lamps and a single chair. But fascism's focus on gigantic structures was not accidental. It was part of a calculated effort to control the people who inhabited them, worked in them, and visited them. Monumental architecture overwhelmed not to elevate the soul, but to crush the individual into the crowd and promote conformity. Mussolini's planned 86-metre statue of himself on one of the highest hills in Rome, on the Monte Mario, which would survey the people and dominate the landscape, is an excellent example of this strategy. The Colossus of Mussolini, as it would come to be called, would tower over even the Vatican's St. Peter's Basilica, communicating fascism's superiority over the world's largest religion. If even your faith and spirituality, your most precious refuge in the arms of God, were subordinated to fascism, what hope did you have in fighting it? But the effort to control people with architecture was perhaps nowhere clearer than the Zeppelin field in Nuremberg, Germany. As usual, Hitler had big ambitions with this site. As his press spokesman put it in 1935, the venue, quote, with its unique concepts of architecture and use of space, will be the highest symbol of National Socialist life and National Socialist Kultura. In it, the unique style of National Socialism will find its strongest expression. The parade ground was huge. The vast, open area allowed up to 250,000 people to march within it. At the front stood a main grandstand. The stone structure was 396 metres long and 24 metres high. And at its centre was a podium for the Führer. If one stood in a rally here, they wouldn't just see Hitler up above on his podium, they would see rows and rows of identical uniformed soldiers. They wouldn't just feel dwarfed by their leader, they would feel surrounded by the state. But it wasn't enough for Hitler that individuals feel small and suffocated. They also needed to feel connected to something bigger. So in 1936, Albert Speer revamped the Zeppelin field. He had searchlights placed all around the perimeter of the venue. Aimed vertically, they formed striking walls of light. At night, this display transformed rallies into theatrical acts of state worship. With the lights, the music, the swastika emblazoned flags, the field practically became a stage. In this context, Hitler may have been the star, but everyone in the field played a part in the production. As the American scholar James Mayo noted, in rallies, the mass of participants may also be seen as part of the stage. With an interflow of emotional impact between actors and audience, the stage may be the focal point, but it is expanded to include all participants. Everyone is on stage and becomes both actor and part of the scene. Though the audience at the Zeppelin field had no control over the spectacle itself, they were not passive observers. Their presence was vital to the performance. They were quite literally part of the stage. In their orchestrated uniformity, they became an architectural element in a grand theatrical space. Their bodies filled the void around the leader, giving his image scale and significance. Their presence did more than just legitimize his power. By participating, even silently, they reflected and reinforced to one another a shared understanding of who held power and who did not. The twisted genius of fascist aesthetics is that it subliminally encouraged conformity, subservience, and above all, belief by making the individual feel small and powerless. This was the ultimate function of Hitler's rallies. As French philosopher Jacques Ellul once wrote, "Integration is what makes the effect of propaganda endure. For action makes its effects irreversible. He who acts in obedience to propaganda can never go back. He is now obliged to believe in it because of his past actions." The fact that the Zeppelin field came to be known as the Cathedral of Light only deepened the impression that the events held there were no mere political rallies, but sacred rites, reinforcing Mussolini's earlier claim that fascism was not just an ideology, but a religion. The effort poured into fascist aesthetics underscores how seriously its leaders took the power of appearances, especially in the case of Mussolini. On a personal level, the Italian dictator didn't care much for art. Hitler himself remarked how visibly bored Mussolini would look inside of art galleries. But Mussolini knew a good power play when he saw one. And in Italy, art was power. This was a country that prided itself on its artistic prowess, whose cultural legacy was internationally renowned. So even if Mussolini wasn't moved by brushstrokes or marble, he understood the political math. Championing the arts meant tying his regime to the myth of Italian greatness. So Mussolini set out to enslave the arts to an exacting fascist bureaucracy. By 1927, Italy had its own cultural oversight organization stacked with state-approved artists. Together with regional committees, it made sure art inside state institutions was always on message. By 1940, there was also a Department of Contemporary Art, tasked with emphasizing national heritage within artworks and explaining their, quote, useful and educative content to the public. Because that was what mattered to Mussolini. He wasn't interested in art for art's sake, only its ability to unify, pacify, and glorify. Art was only welcome as long as it promised to play nice. For Hitler, art was far more precious. Sure, it was political, but it was also very personal. Before Hitler was Führer, he was, of course, an aspiring artist with firm ideas about what he liked and what he did not. So when he took power in 1933, it wasn't just ideology that shaped Nazi aesthetics, it was taste. His taste. Instead of subjecting art professors in Vienna to his artistic mediocrity, he would instead force it on an entire country. To Hitler, art was meant to soothe the soul, not challenge it. There should be no pain, no mess, no modernism. He despised the chaos of futurism, the abstraction of cubism, and the emotional swirl of expressionism. He wanted Neoclassicism, straightforward realism, and nothing else. In 1937, his definition of degenerate art was formalized with a decree banning any work that, quote, insulted German feeling or destroyed or confused natural forms. or simply revealed an absence of adequate manual and artistic skill. Artists who didn't toe the line were barred from teaching, exhibiting, even painting. Art that had already been created was seized. In total, 17,000 so-called degenerate works from 1,400 artists were taken and either sold abroad, traded for old masters, or burned. Unsurprisingly, Hitler wanted any hint of individualism, abstraction, or subversion to be extinguished, aware perhaps that enemy ideologies could hide even in the most familiar forms. A Roman column isn't always just a column. Change how it's scaled, spaced, or lit, and suddenly it can suggest democracy or dictatorship. It can make you feel welcomed and contemplative, or it can make you feel small and speechless. And by the time you notice, the architecture has already done its job. So, to return to the question, why did fascist regimes care so much about how things looked? Well, because aesthetics are a form of control. They shape how people see the world, how they see each other, and how they see themselves. A field isn't just a field, it's a stage. A government building isn't just a workplace, it's a monument to power. A face on a billboard isn't just a portrait, it's a god. Fascist aesthetics created a visual reality in which the state was ever present, always powerful, always sacred. Art and architecture weren't just decoration, they were immersive tools of myth-making. And myths were fundamental to fascism, because they gave people the feeling of revolution or of glory without the burden of actual change. Fascist leaders didn't have to deliver a new, better world, they just had to sell the fantasy. This is why philosopher Walter Benjamin famously wrote, quote, "The logical result of fascism is the introduction of aesthetics into political life." Mussolini and Hitler gave the masses only performance and spectacle, not real power or prosperity. Their rituals gave them the illusion of participation while denying them real political agency. Fascist design did much the same. Like Hitler wanted it to, it created a world that soothed you. Art and architecture flattered your image of the state and gave rise to pride. If you were of a patriotic persuasion. If you were not, fascist design intimidated, threatened, and constantly reminded you of just how very small and powerless you really were.